All right, so we are ready to set up a golden rectangle in our visual journals using numbers from the Fibonacci sequence. As you recall, the higher you go up in the Fibonacci sequence, the closer you get to the golden ratio. We are not going to go super high, but we are going to be setting up a golden rectangle using numbers from the Fibonacci sequence. So let's go ahead and talk about what you need to get started on this. Okay, here are your materials: a visual journal or another piece of paper, a pencil, an eraser for mistakes. You're actually going to need one even for things that aren't mistakes, so make sure you have one of those handy. Make sure your ruler has inch marks across the top because we will be doing our measurement using inches. Okay, so I have one I started here. I'm going to set it to the side. I may reference it as we work, but the way I started that, it's not done, but it shows you where we were headed, is the first thing we're going to do is along the square holes in your visual journal, you're going to take your ruler and you're going to line it up with the bottom edge of those holes, and you're going to draw a line straight across. Okay, so you should be able to see that pretty clearly. All right. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm lightly going to work out the Fibonacci sequence up to 13 over here just to refresh your memory. Now, I'm going to do this very lightly. Later on, maybe I'll go back and make it look nicer, but to start, you don't have to do this. I just want to refresh your memory as to how the sequence started. So actually, I'm going to put this one down because I've already started this one. So in the Fibonacci sequence, it starts with 0. It goes 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 5 equals 8, 8 plus 5 equals 13. So we're going to be starting with the measurement based on this number of 13. Okay, so let me explain what I mean here. Essentially, we want to set up a rectangle that's 13 by 13. We're going to be using half-inch marks because our journal is only 8 inches, so we're going to use the half-inch mark. So let's talk about measurement here. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer for you so that you can see this a little more clearly. All right, the rulers we have in the art room start with measurement with the first black line, not at the end of the ruler. So when you go to set this up, you're going to scoot this over to the edge of the paper. So that black line is lining up with the edge of the paper. And that means that a small chunk of the ruler is hanging off the edge. Okay. Now, I know a lot of students have some difficulty with measurement. So let's take a refresher here for a second and think about, how do we find the halfway mark or the half-inch mark? So if we go from the first line here to this line and we count them, we get 16. Don't believe me? Watch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay? So 16 divided by 2, which helps us find halfway, would be 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if you're struggling with your measurement, you can always count 8 marks. If you're not struggling and you understand how to use measurement, you don't need to do that. Okay, from here I'm going to mark 1, 1.5, 2. I need a little more precise with that one. 2.5, 3. 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5. And we're going to stop at 6.5. Okay? All right. Now, I am going to do something. You can just count it, or you can do this yourself. But we want a 13 by 13 rectangle. So I'm going to very lightly write this because I'm going to erase it. If you don't want to write it, you can just count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, so I've got my 13 sections. So this is where our rectangle will end, right here at that mark. Now, when we're using measurement, it's important to have at least 2 points of measurement. So we're going to go ahead, cross the bottom, and do the same thing. And I think you're going to be okay. Let me check in this visual journal where I set it up. You could probably start it with your ruler at the bottom of the page, and I think that will be fine. Okay, so I'm going to move my ruler to about the bottom of the page. I am again making sure that this line is lined up with the edge of the paper. And I'm going to repeat the process. Again, if you're having trouble, you can count to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You do not count this first line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I could keep counting by 8s. Or again, if you're good with your measurement, just mark every ½ inch on your ruler. Make sure you're using the side that says inches until you get to 6½. Okay, if you really want to be careful, you can count it again or write it lightly. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And you're counting the spaces, not the dot marks, okay? All right. So here's where I'm gonna pause this for a second because you guys are about to walk in the door any minute. And then when I come back to record it, we'll move on to the next step of the process. Okay, so here's where we left off. We had measured out 13 equal sections. And the reason we did 13 is, if you recall, 13 is a number in the Fibonacci sequence. So we're working within the numbers of the Fibonacci sequence to set up our golden rectangle. So the next number, if we're working in reverse in our Fibonacci sequence, is 8. So we're going to set up our rectangle, and then we're going to set up an 8 by 8 square. Okay, so what we need to do for our next step is we need to set up this section. Okay, so we're going to be setting up the side of our rectangle, and this is going to be 8. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to turn our visual journal. We are going to connect the marks for 13 together. So line your ruler up with those 2 marks and lightly draw a line. Okay. Remember that if you need to slow me down, pause or rewind it, you should do that. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to use the same measurement of ½ inch, and I am going to mark out each one. So ½ inch, remember if you need to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1 inch, 1½, 2, 2½, 3, 3½, 4, 4½. We'll stop there because I'm pretty sure that's more than what we need. All right, so my next step, once I have that done, is inside of each section I'm going to label 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we actually don't need this last one. Okay? Now, I'm going to come down to the other side and do the same thing. So I'm taking my ruler, remember to start with this black line lined up right on the pencil line we made before, and we're going to mark every ½ inch just like we just did. So half, 1, 1½, 2. Again, remember, if you're having trouble knowing where the halfway is, you can always count to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, you could do that again if you needed to. We're going to go to 3, 3½, 4, and I believe that's where it ended. So we can check that because we're going to label 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so now we've got that measured out. What we're going to do is we're going to take this dot here on the other side of the 8, and we're going to come down to, I'm going to move this up a little bit so we can see the whole page at once. Okay, I think that's high enough. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect the dot here and the dot here together. Dots after the 8s to set up our rectangle. Okay, so we've got our rectangle. I'm going to turn this back this way. I recommend you do the same thing. All right, so it was 13 to start and 8. Let's do some basic math, some division. You can pull out a calculator or you can just watch me if you want. So here's my calculator, and we're going to take 13 divided by 8 equals 1.625. So we're getting closer to the golden ratio, which is 1.618. As you know, the higher you go in the Fibonacci sequence, the closer you actually get to the golden ratio. Okay, so we have 13 this way, 8 this way, which sets up our golden rectangle. So now what we need to do is divide this rectangle into separate boxes using the Fibonacci sequence. So it's a 13 by 8. Now we're going to be doing an 8 by 8 square. Okay, so that's the next step. So what we need to do is we're going to work a little bit backwards, and we're going to erase these numbers across the top. So let's go ahead and try this. So we go 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to do the same thing down here. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and I'm going to circle my ones so that you can identify them. All right, so what I'm going to do now is this dot and this dot are going to line up, and I'm going to connect these. Now, we have 8 this way and 8 this way, so we have a square. All right, so the next step that we have is to do a 5 by 5 square. So let's go ahead and check and see if we have 5 left here. So we can, oh, we do. All we have to do is look down at these numbers below from before, but you could also just check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So what we need to do on this side is make sure that we go up 5. So you can subtract and figure it out, or you can just label it. Okay, so it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so what you're going to do, finish erasing these, is we're going to erase these on this side. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So from this mark to this mark, we're going to line up our ruler, but we're only going to draw the line from here over to the edge of the paper. So it looks like this, okay? So the next number in the Fibonacci sequence is 3. So we need to set up a 3 by 3 square. Now we're going to do this. We already have 1, 2, 3. We have 1, 2, 3 left here. And we need to go 1, 2, 3 on this side. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, here's my 3, here's my 3. I am going to line this up, and I'm only going to draw, I keep my ruler lined up, but I'm only going to draw a line from here up to here. Okay, so now I have my 8 by 8, 5 by 5, 3 by 3, which we talked about in the story we listened to. They talked about him drawing this out in the sand. So the next number we have in the Fibonacci sequence, if we're working backwards, is a 2. Okay, so we need to set up a 2 by 2 square. We have 1, 2 sections left here. So what we need to do is count down this side, 3, 2, that makes 2. Okay, if you're confused, you can always erase those and go 1, 2. So we're going to take the 2 mark here and line it up with the mark just below 2 here. and this is going to connect over this way. Okay, so now we have our 8 by 8, 5 by 5, 3 by 3, 2 by 2. The next number in the Fibonacci sequence is 1. So we're going to come down here. We already have this lined up. So we have 1, 2. And what we're going to do is come down here. So you can see 4 and 5 correlate with 1 and 2. So we can go 1, 2. And we're going to draw a line right here. Okay. There we have it. Now, if we did it correctly, it should look like the picture I'm about to put on the screen in the video. So, hopefully we did. The next thing I want you to do is go ahead and erase all these numbers away from here. Don't erase your lines like I did, but erase your numbers. So go ahead and do all that erasing, and then we're going to come back in a minute and I'll show you the next step in this process. Okay, so if you think back to the story we read, Blockhead, the story of Fibonacci, then you recall that after Fibonacci drew these squares in the sand, he said these need to be connected, and he connected them with a spiral. So we're going to go ahead and freehand sketch in the spiral. So we're going to start in our 8 by 8 section, and we're going to go ahead and sketch in a curve that goes from this corner to this corner. So you can just lightly sketch that in. So we're just freehand sketching it. And sketch it lightly until you feel like you've got the right shape. Okay, and then from here, we're going to come up in from this corner to this corner in the 5 by 5. Remember, this is a spiral, so you want to make sure it's nice and rounded. Okay. And then what you're going to do is go from the 3 by 3. So essentially a quarter circle in each one. Now we could be, I guess, more precise, but we're just going to freehand sketch these in for our purposes. Okay, then we go to 2 by 2. Then in from the corner of 1 and 1, and 1 to 1 to create our Fibonacci spiral. Okay, so now what we have in our visual journal is a visual representation of the Fibonacci sequence and the golden rectangle with the spiral inside of it. So let's go ahead and talk about what we want to label this with. So we're going to go ahead and do that in the next step. Okay, so obviously this has changed a little bit since I paused the recording and came back to it. I went ahead and did the next step. I don't think it's something you really need to watch me do, because you can do it in your own manner. But you'll notice that I included the word Fibonacci, referring to the Fibonacci sequence, golden, and rectangle. So golden refers both to the golden rectangle and the golden ratio, which we know is connected to the Fibonacci sequence. We talked about it throughout the video. So I also, if you turn my journal this way, we'll see that I began to write out the numbers of the Fibonacci sequence. So it's 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. I believe the next one's 21. So what you do is, if you have room for that, you could keep going, but I do want you to at least include Fibonacci and golden rectangle. If you can work in the numbers of the Fibonacci sequence on the outside of the golden rectangle, that would be fabulous. Okay, so then the next step is going to be using a Sharpie and your ruler to bring out the lines of the golden rectangle. So you're going to do this with a fine point Sharpie, which I will have for you in class, and you're just going to go ahead and very neatly trace over your lines that you put in. So I'm lining everything up, holding it nice and steady in place, and tracing over all of my pencil lines with my fine point Sharpie. Okay. So once I have that done, I'm going to use a thicker Sharpie to trace over the spiral, and then I'll trace over my lettering with Sharpie. That's going to be up to you how you do that part. And then we're going to talk about how we're going to shade this in using colored pencils in the next section of the video. Okay, so let me grab a wider Sharpie and show you how to do that section of it. Going through my desk drawer to find one. Okay, so I've got my Sharpie that's a little bit thicker, and I'm going to go ahead and just very neatly and very carefully focus and take my time to trace over your spiral. All right, so we'll come back in the next video and we'll talk about the next steps.